coming back to the student and perhaps the student and the educator as subjects, the question of the subject is central in your work and your philosophy of education. So why a subject and not a person or an individual? Why a subject and not a student or a teacher? For viewers and listeners who may not be as familiar with your approach to the subject in education, can you describe the difference between to be subjected and subjectification, or becoming subject, and what roles these play in your philosophy of education?
I can try, but it's also it's nice and appropriate that you point at some of these issues and words, because that's another part of the process where you start with an idea and you think, okay, I've got it sorted. And then people begin to respond and they say, well, do you mean this and not that? And then actually what initially you thought, I'm done with that, you need to revisit in order to find all the nuances. So this whole idea of subjectification is also part of that process. But I still like the term a lot. And this is an idea that comes straight from inspiration from Hannah Arendt, who says the beauty of the word subject is precisely its double meaning. To be a subject means to be the origin of action, the origin of initiative. And that is, you can say, part of our experience of existing as a subject of our own lives. But she says, and I think that's a brilliant insight, the only thing we as individuals can do is to take initiative, to begin something. But for that initiative to become real, to arrive in the world, in the social fabric, other people need to take up our beginnings. That's her language. And again, I really like the language. And then she says that means that if we want to exist in the world, we are therefore subjected to what other people do with our beginnings. And she says, and again I agree, it's this double movement of initiating something, but at the same time being subjected to what is beyond her control. That is what it means to exist as subject. And that's what I like about the word. So, and there are people who don't like it because they only hear subjection, and they say we don't want to be subjected. I also have to say my colleagues in England make that point often, where they say what really frustrates us here is that legally we are subjects of the monarch, not free citizens. So the word comes with that history and that experience as well. But all the other words like individual, person, they don't have this tension sort of in the word itself. That's what I like about it. And then subjectification is a difficult word because it suggests a kind of process. And what I've tried to do is to say, no, subjectification is an event. So for me, it's not a becoming. It's not that you become more of a subject when you get older or wiser or more skilled. Subjectification is an event, you can say, where your subjectness suddenly is at stake. And that's what I like about it as well, that you can say, I cannot produce my own subjectivity. I'm in a sense totally dependent on what occurs in my life, what happens in my biography. And out of that, you have to make your own life. And there are moments where there are, yeah, questions that really come to you, and where you suddenly you can say become subjectified or discover that it's up to you there to do something. And for me, you can say that's the event of subjectification. And it disappears after that again. So you cannot say, okay, now I'm here and I'm here for the rest of my life.
If so, subjects are always in the world, and the world and subject have a complex relationship. Could you speak a little bit more about the relationship between subject, world, and education in these dynamics of subjectification that you're talking about?
That's a brilliant question. I think it goes to the heart of, yeah, something important and difficult at the same time. Because you can say, why education? Why isn't the encounter of subject and world enough? What do educators need to do there? And I find that an important question. So even if you say, here we have a theme that as educators we understand is really important. We don't want our children to become clones of us. We don't want to keep control over them. They must lead their own lives. The question is then, is there anything educational to do there? And I think there is. And again, you have to be very, careful and quite precise, because education is not always necessary. There are children, young people who grow up who, in the encounter with the world, meet these questions, meet themselves, and a lot goes well. I think part of what I do in my work is to look at the world and say, we are constantly creating worlds that pull all of us in different directions. Over the past years, I've been writing quite a lot about this idea of the impulse society, and the whole idea that we have an economic system that constantly wants us to buy more, that constantly tries to multiply our desires so that more stuff can be sold. You can say there we create an environment in which it becomes pretty difficult to stay standing. So it undermines, you could say, the possibility to exist as subject. And then you can say that's a point where education may want to step in. Maybe to keep this world at a bit of a distance. So I use this phrase to give the new generation at least a fair chance at their own subjectness. And if you say, well, just step into the world and you'll find what you need to find, then we may be a bit too naive or too optimistic, because this world has a dynamic of its own. So there is something there. I also tried to articulate that in this title of Obstinate Education, to say the one basic gesture of education is to resist, to push back, but it's precisely to push back so that something remains possible. So there you can say there is maybe a task for education. The other phrase I found in a text from Jacques Rancière, where he says he writes the task of the emancipatory schoolmaster is to refuse the students the satisfaction of not having to think for themselves. And if you take that a bit bigger, you can say that what he's saying there is the task of the educator is to refuse the student the satisfaction of not having to be a subject. For me, that's another way where this question of world, student, and educator comes into a particular relationship, where, of course, we can never force our students to be subjects, but we can try to undermine the satisfaction that we all get from not having to be a subject, where we just say, well, tell us what to do and I'll do it, but it's not me, it's your responsibility. So to keep that space open and to keep pushing there, and in that sense, you can say to dissatisfy or disappoint your students, that's part of the educational gesture as well.